2026 has been one heck of an exciting year for aspiring filmmakers on YouTube, as 3 films have already released from YouTubers making their theatrical directorial debuts, and all are incredibly impressive displays of artistic vision and talent that have blown all box office expectations out of the water. In fact, last weekend, Disney's first Star Wars movie in 7 years got beaten in its second weekend at the box office by 2 of these YouTuber movies, one of which was on its 3rd weekend. I hope you can appreciate how insane that is. Many have already talked about this remarkable success, so this probably isn't news to you, but I want to look at each of these projects individually. I've already praised Iron Lung multiple times here on the channel since its release in February, and within the same week in May, I saw both Obsession and Backrooms, the first of which I didn't even realize was a YouTuber's first feature film until after I saw it, and I never would have guessed. The latter, I'd been anticipating for some time, and was of course hoping it would live up to the high standards of the first two, but, well, I'll get more into my thoughts on each film in a bit. But let's just say, I originally wanted to upload this video within a day or two of Backrooms' release, but I had to take some time to mull over my thoughts and feelings on the film. It would be all too easy to just say all 3 of these movies were fantastic first films for their directors and massive financial successes that Hollywood has to pay attention to, and leave it at that. But that wouldn't really be adding anything to the conversation, so I wanted to use this video to go deeper into this phenomenon than I've yet seen anyone recently do. So let me explain exactly what I'm here to do. I'm not here to break down the numbers. If that's what you want to see, I'll link Chandler's great video on this cinematic revolution in the description. I'm just here to say what I hope these successes mean for Hollywood. So after briefly reviewing each film and commenting on their success, I'm going to look at the filmmakers behind each of them and see how their stories fit into the larger narrative that is the shifting landscape of Hollywood in an age where the studio system is being fundamentally challenged and may need to drastically change if it wants to survive. But before I get into it, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here. So if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Now without further ado, let's dive into this discussion with the film that got it started in the first place. Mark Fishbach's self-funded passion project and surprise cult hit, Iron Lung. I won't spend much time on this one since I've already talked about it here, but I found Markiplier's theatrical debut to be a thematically rich and brilliantly acted and directed claustrophobic thriller that does some incredibly effective world building with little more than fantastic production design and atmosphere. With Mark taking on just about every major role in the film, including producer, writer, director, editor, and star, it is shocking that he doesn't drop the ball for a second in any one of those areas. This is a tight, small-scale film that could easily have become boring in the wrong hands, but which ends up making the fullest use of its concept and turning its limitations to its advantage, becoming an incredibly suspenseful ride, seamlessly blending several genres of horror, and providing a compelling character study at the same time. Markiplier deliberately rejected the opportunity to work with any major studios on this project in order to retain as much control over it as possible in every step of the production and distribution. And it paid off, because behind the camera, in front of it, and in the editing room, he proves himself more than capable of delivering on his artistic vision, and I can't wait to see more from him. Next up, Obsession was by far the biggest surprise hit of the 3 films we're talking about here, being made for less than $1 million, and not only beating a Star Wars movie at the box office, but becoming the most profitable film ever since Paranormal Activity, purely thanks to fantastic word of mouth. It was directed by Curry Barker, a young filmmaker who's been doing sketch comedy and horror short films on his YouTube channel, That's a Bad Idea, with his friend Cooper Tomlinson, who also acted in the film. So much has already been said about this movie, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is both the scariest horror movie I have ever seen, and also just a thematically brilliant masterpiece of a film. Its horror comes not from cheap jump scares or creepy imagery, but from its complete unpredictability and the absolute conceptual horror of the situation itself as it unfolds. It's the kind of film that only gets scarier the more you think about it afterward. Its characters are also brilliantly written and acted, with Bear in particular being such a fascinating protagonist that he split the audience in two, between those who relate to him so much they desperately try to justify his cowardice and selfishness, and those so disgusted by his choices that they desperately try to ignore how universal his desires and mindset that drove him are. And of course, the actress for Nikki deserves an Oscar for this absolutely chilling performance. The reason the film's horror is so effective is because it reveals the horrific nature of the self-serving obsession and need for validation that passes for love in our society, and forces us to confront how similar we really are to the protagonist, through whom we learn the true cost of obsession. I know horror isn't for everyone, but if everyone had to watch just one horror movie in their life, I'd argue it should be this one. And finally, we have Kane Parsons' first theatrical installment in his YouTube Backroom series, about which I'm still not entirely sure how I feel. My familiarity with the web series made this an interesting experience, and I wish I could know what it would have been like to go in blind. The film was at its best for me when it was fitting it into the puzzle that is the overarching narrative of the series, with many little Easter eggs sprinkled throughout, massive additions to the lore dropped, and fascinating new questions raised. While that makes me think the film was made more for people already immersed in the world, at the same time, I didn't find the exploration of the backrooms itself nearly as creepy as I did when watching the found footage videos on YouTube. Part of that may be the YouTube format itself, but I think part of it is just that it's no longer new for me, and what we see in the film largely feels like a retread of what I've seen before. In that sense, I wonder if the film is better for those not familiar with the series. Of course, it does do some very new things near the end, but honestly, some of those new things are arguably the weakest parts of the film, sometimes steering the tone from unsettling to straight up goofy. And while I do appreciate Kane's attempts to give the story some thematic depth and make the backroom symbolic of the characters' psychological states, those attempts ultimately feel a little too clunky and on the nose to me. So out of the three films here, this is easily the one that resonated the least with me, but that is not to say that I was unimpressed with Kane Parsons' talent. After all, very few directorial debuts are complete masterpieces, and the previous two examples are very much the exception to the rule. And even with my issues with the film, I can't stop thinking about it and what it's trying to say. Of course, what matters most is that it seems to be resonating with its target audience, bringing in A24's biggest opening for a film in their history, something I highly doubt would have been possible had the studio not trusted the property to the man who made it popular in the first place. But I'll go deeper into that in a bit. For now, let's go back through each of these films and look at the people who made them possible. After all, not all these filmmakers are the same just because they got their starts on YouTube, and each of their successes comes with slightly different causes for hope for the future. First, we have Mark Fishbach, better known as Markiplier, who I doubt needs much introduction. Of all those in this video, he was surely the least likely candidate to break into filmmaking. Not that he hasn't had any useful experience in storytelling before this, but he's not mainly known for his original storytelling content nearly as much as his gaming content, and most of his narrative storytelling isn't trying to be taken all that seriously. So the fact that he made the leap into theatrical film at all makes him a noteworthy case. But I think the main thing setting him apart as an aspiring filmmaker is the fact that he went completely independent, not only funding his film out of pocket, but getting it into theaters almost entirely thanks to his fanbase campaigning for it until theater chains recognized the interest. And the shocking success of this highly unorthodox method of releasing a film has been the basis of quite a bit of debate, with some heralding it as the beginning of the end for the Hollywood studio system entirely, and others arguing that only the few most established and influential of online personalities could ever hope to accomplish anything like this, making it an anomaly unlikely to be replicated anytime soon. And I fall somewhere in the middle. It is certainly true that few aspiring filmmakers have the resources and influence to do anything close to what Markiplier did on their own. But I think it's also true that this will signal change for Hollywood. Fellow YouTube gamer Jacksepticeye has already announced he's producing a Bloodborne movie, so I imagine we'll see an influx of influential people who genuinely care about their favorite properties stepping in to get them made right rather than waiting for Hollywood to pick them up and praying they don't butcher them. I don't think completely self-funded and self-distributed films like Iron Lung will become the norm anytime soon, but I do anticipate more people from outside the studio system taking the initiative to get the films they want made. And I think Iron Lung woke Hollywood up to the fact that if they don't give audiences what they want, others will give it to them instead, so they need to step up their game. However, whereas Markiplier is an incredibly unusual case that's unlikely to ever become the norm, Curry Barker's story is much less remarkable. Aside from his film's staggering financial success, of course. In fact, Barker himself has said the only difference between him and countless new filmmakers before him is that he grew up in a time where YouTube existed. Like the majority of aspiring filmmakers over the decades, including many of the greats we all know today, Barker developed and showcased his skills through short films and sketch comedy until he got enough people in the industry to take him seriously that when he had the right idea at the right time, it wasn't hard for him to break in. This is the story of many, if not most, of the greatest filmmakers of our time, and many of them likely would have found success on YouTube before breaking into film themselves had it existed in their early days. However, until recently, it doesn't seem studios really look to platforms like YouTube in their search for new talent, perhaps seeing the content there as a lesser form of art that couldn't translate to the big screen thanks to early ill-conceived failures like the Smosh movie or whatever that film was that Logan Paul was in. Of course, Curry Barker is by no means the first YouTuber to disprove this perception, the most popular example being the Philippou brothers of the channel Raka Raka, who made the hit horror films Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. But while the change has been gradual up until now, the frankly miraculous success of Obsession is sure to open the floodgates for YouTube filmmakers as studios begin scouring the platform for fresh new talent. Now, much of what I just said about Curry Barker could also be said of Kane Parsons, but there's also some key differences that make Kane's story unique. See, unlike Barker, he wasn't actively seeking out studio support for an original project. He was just using YouTube to tell his own story in its own format, when it got seen by James Wan and others who trusted him enough to hand him the money to keep doing what he was already doing on a much larger scale. This wasn't an amateur filmmaker pursuing a career and making his big break with a brand new idea. It was a studio seeing an IP gain popularity on the internet, and rather than steal it, meddle with it, and give it to an established director with notes to make it as mainstream as possible, they instead brought on the person who made it popular in the first place to just keep doing his thing. This isn't just exciting for aspiring filmmakers, but for the creators and fans of properties they fear to see butchered by studios that don't understand them. This gives me hope for other stories that exploded online, such as Epic the Musical, that their theatrical adaptations might be trusted to the individuals that made people fall in love with them in the first place. So what does all this mean for the future? Well, let's recap my rambling real quick with 3 specific predictions. When I look at the impact Iron Lung has had, I see more ambitious creators making their own films independently of the studio system. This doesn't mean Hollywood is likely to completely collapse anytime soon, as these films will likely only be made by some of the most well-established and successful online creators, but they will provide competition for studios, hopefully driving them to listen to fans and bring on people who care about the material they adapt. When I see the success of Obsession, I imagine studios turning far more attention to YouTube in their search for talent, finding those who have already proven their potential, and allowing them to bring their voices to Hollywood rather than relying on nepotism and running everything by committee. Of course, there is danger that nothing changes once YouTubers are integrated into the studio system, but that leads to my last point. After the success of Backrooms, I hope studios will realize that those making content online, those who have already earned their success by giving people exactly what they want and made the most popular online properties popular in the first place, are more in touch than them with what audiences really want. And especially when it comes to adapting existing concepts and IPs, they will trust these creators to please their audiences and give them the freedom to do so. Perhaps that's wishful thinking, but of all my predictions here, it's the one I'm most desperately hopeful for. With that, let me wrap this discussion up with 2 last miscellaneous thoughts. First, if there's anything about this trend I might find slightly worrying, it may be that all these films are small, simple horror movies, and I can't help but wonder if those are the only kinds of films that will feel the impact of this shift. Now, the genre in question isn't surprising. Horror films are generally cheap and easy to produce, so of course that's what YouTubers can afford to produce themselves and what studios feel comfortable gambling on creators unproven in the studio system. The question is just whether this trend will lead to bigger blockbusters being more auteur-driven, independent creators being trusted like this in a wider variety of genres, and new filmmakers like the ones we've discussed being allowed to do bigger things without being swallowed up by the Hollywood machine. Or whether we're just going to see a boom in fresh new voices in the horror genre, while elsewhere, corporations continue to throw vast amounts of money at the corpses of their once lucrative IPs. Only time will tell. And finally, with all the reasons for hope this gives me for Hollywood and our entertainment as a whole, ultimately, the biggest reason this trend is so exciting to me personally is that it reminds me that filmmakers are ordinary people, that the gap between us and them isn't all that large and unbreachable after all, that we all have the chance to make our marks if we just go out and create, if we put in the work to exercise our talents and take the leap of faith to share our passion with the world. This trend has made me believe that I could be a writer, a filmmaker, if I just put in the time and effort. I know full well that'll take a lot of time and luck, and I'll have a lot of competition from far more talented and motivated people than me, But I don't have any chance if I don't shoot for it, and that chance feels more real now than ever. And a part of the reason this video took as long as it did for me to upload was because I was finally feeling motivated to write for the first time in months, and I do not want to stifle that motivation now. So if my upload schedule slows down for a bit, consider it a good sign that I'm putting my energy where it matters most. That said, I don't intend to go anywhere, and I greatly appreciate all your support, especially my new viewers from my last video. I hope you'll continue to support me in this journey, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Tell me, do you think Hollywood is going to learn from these successes? What do you predict is going to change in the near future, and what do you most want to change? As always, I'm just here to kick off the discussion, so please, join me in the conversation down below. Until next time, just keep thinking out loud.